Can you all see my screen? Hopefully, yes.
Clearly.
Okay, well, thank you very much. First, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to talk about some experiences and some ideas that we're thinking about investigating. Very, very honored to be in such a distinguished company. We say we have three distinguished presenters. Well, I can see two. Where's the other one? But it's really good to be here. So I'm just going to talk to you about the role of civil society and volunteers in humanitarian and disaster relief. And this is just to give you say, sort of a flavor of some examples we have seen in this area, but also to sort of share some ideas about areas which we think might be interested to do research here. So if you know something about that, and if you have done some research about that, just please share with us. So I mean, just probably just as a background, but we know why we're here. So disasters have been increasing throughout the years, and its importance and the management of those disasters has become more and more important. And we will see that through the next presentations. But also one thing which is quite interesting is obviously you have your normal responders, the government, you have NGOs, for example, or commercial organizations which help to respond to disasters. And we know that's the importance of disaster management in terms of preventing disasters, decrease the risk of the disaster happening in the first place, and if it happens, well, then responding and minimizing the suffering for the people that are in there. So in terms of it's moving without my control. Okay. Some of the things that obviously we want to do is go to the different stages of the disaster management cycle. Hold on a second, something strange here. I don't have timers or anything. Sorry, I don't know why that was moving like that. Let me just check if I'm not clicking on anything. Yep.
No problem.
Anyway, well, we know disaster management is important, otherwise we wouldn't be in this talk. And one thing we started looking at was of volunteers in disaster relief. And obviously, this came out from, I'm originally from Mexico. So we had an earthquake in 1985, where a lot of volunteers started helping because the government was basically overrun. And we've seen that time and time again. I'll show you in the next couple of slides sort of a more recent earthquake that happened. So we started thinking about, well, what's the role of volunteers in disaster relief, and how can we help with our lens? I'm coming back as this stage from a sort of modeling, simulation, information systems background. So how can we use those tools to help coordinate volunteers and to make that more effective? So we started looking at, if you look in the literature, you will see that they are referred in a number of ways. So citizen-driven disaster relief, which is the one I like. Some of them call it survivor-led humanitarian response and reconstruction, the spontaneous volunteers. You will see that there is already some literature, but not much on the use and coordination of these volunteers. So I say we're going to give you a few examples. The first one is in Puebla, in Mexico. This is my city, is where I come from. Actually, and this is the volcano that's there. Is the Popocatépetl. As you can see, sort of. Actually, I took that picture when I was there at some point from my hotel window. It's quite close to the city. It's quite an active volcano, and in this case, there was an earthquake on 19th of September 2017. Again, for just at that time I went to Mexico for 2 days, and one of them was this. Fortunately, I had just come down from my hotel room because I was on the 21st floor, so I was just leaving the hotel when the earthquake strike hit. So I was glad I wasn't all the way up. But basically, so it was a 7.1 magnitude, center not far from Puebla. 370 people were killed, and there was a number of things that were observed in that earthquake. So as we can see here, so there was a huge mobilization of volunteers and people from the public helping. So we can see here people lifting rubble, trying to rescue people who have been trapped. People donating equipment and material, and obviously to say sort of volunteering to go and help with the relief effort. And something which struck me was that, for example, there was TV coverage of school which had collapsed. So it was in all the channels. So all the people that wanted to help went to that school. And so there were many people there, which obviously didn't need that many people. But there were some other places which had equally been affected, but that had no volunteers there. So it got me thinking, well, what can we do in order to sort of try to coordinate those efforts, and maybe some of the tools that we can work with, we can use to try to make that more efficient. So try to direct those volunteers. Obviously, there is an issue with volunteers in that they are not coordinated, or not at the moment. So they go to where they think they're needed. So we thought maybe, I guess it's some of the ideas that I want to explore, and we haven't sort of progressed much on the development of those tools, but some of the ideas that we're trying to explore. As you can see here, so there are some volunteer organizations which still volunteers, but are a bit more organized. So we have one here in which sort of schools, universities become centers for people to go and donate, and from there distribute them to where they're needed. That's it. And we have some organizations. This organization, the Topos, I'm not sure if you are familiar with them. It's an organization that was created after that 1985 earthquake. And they go to places where, so they train on rescue in collapsed buildings. And their motto is that, sorry for the language, but they have the balls to go where no one else will go. So basically just get on their rubble and tunnel into quite dangerous buildings. They have actually been in Indonesia, so they went in 2004 for the tsunami and 2009 for the earthquake. And actually they say that 2004 Indonesia was one of the toughest assignments they have ever had to do. Well, partly because of the scale of the operation, but also because they're volunteers, they pay their own airfares. So they got, I think, a sort of very discounted airfare from Japan Airlines that got them up to Singapore, but they couldn't get from there to Indonesia, and it was just because someone donated $400 for them to take the ferry to cross that they could get there. So this is just an example of different levels of volunteers. So these are people who are volunteers, but they are organized, they train, and they have a certain structure when they go into areas. Another example was Occupy Sandy, if you remember when Hurricane Sandy hit the east coast of the United States, New York particularly, and some of the things that they did with the Occupy movement, which was quite active at that time, was quicker to organize than some of the governments like organizations FEMA or NGOs like the Red Cross. So they set up communication hubs to establish communication, coordinate, so trying to do some of this coordination. And they were quite innovative in trying to get help and donations. So rather than just getting people to donate whatever they thought or they wanted or they had, so they said two things. One was a sort of online account so people could donate, and so they could have the money and buy the things that were needed, but also in-kind donations, but quite, I really like this example, in which they use Amazon Wedding Registry, in which you can put things, normally if you have a wedding, you can put things that you want people to buy for your wedding if they want to give you a gift. So they use this to say, well, we need, I don't know, 200 tents. So they put that in the tents, and people could go into Amazon in those lists and buy or contribute to buying some of those items. The last example I have is when the Icelandic volcano, Eyjafjallajökull, I can only say that once a day, otherwise I get struck. When the volcano hit in 2010, and how the community was organized and how they intervened to help other people. It was quite interesting because we were doing one of the projects that Adi mentioned at the time, so Albores, evacuation responsiveness for government organizations. We were working with 10 governments, mostly in Europe and in Japan, and one of them was Iceland. So we went before and after the volcano hit to look at their disaster preparedness. So it's quite interesting to see the plans and then to see what had happened and then go back and study how they have actually deployed those plans. So if you remember, it was a volcano, it's a huge plume. You can see here. So that's the whole of Iceland, and see that if you remember, it sort of closed the European and North American airspace for quite a few days. And this is the area around here. So what we have here is, that the volcano that exploded, Eyjafjallajökull, and actually their planning assumptions or their exercises are for the bigger volcano here, Katla, to erupt, so which is going to be I would say about sort of 10 times bigger than Eyjafjallajökull if it goes. You can see here some of the evacuation routes, some of the shelters that they had in place, and the characteristics of the region is that it's quite dispersed. Obviously, Iceland is sort of not very densely populated country. So you can see some of these dots here are actually houses that where people live. So that presents some challenges for the evacuation of those places. There's some pictures from the aftermath. So basically, also there's a volcano, but there's a glacier at the top. So there was a lot of water melting and flooding as a consequence. We went in, I don't know, probably what, 4 or 5 months after the volcano. And there were still sort of rivers which had formed from the eruption flowing at that time. So you can see here some of the houses that the people live in, and as I say, sort of there are roads which go to the main roads, so, and there are the houses that branch off those roads. So one of the things they have there is that when there's evacuation, the person in the last house has a obligation to check that all the neighbors further up on the road have evacuated. And so they can, when people evacuate, they put a sign outside the door so that they don't have to sort of drive into the branch of the roads to get to the house to check. So they say, well, we have evacuated, and in that way, people can check whether they have gone. I just like these pictures, quite impressive of you can see people here evacuating. You can see the ash clouds and some of the settlements of people that were evacuated. And so this is how it was once a few hours had passed. And you can see here sort of people helping neighbors, for example, to get their animals into the barns so that they are protected from the ash, which would be quite damaging. We have here once the volcano has passed and has settled, you have sort of volunteer organizations, neighbors, helping people, for example, in this case, to clean the roofs, to get things back to normal in a way. So, for example, here removing the ash is quite heavy, so it could collapse the roof. So, like I said, these are some examples. We've done some work on. Not sure what this is coming like this. 4 minutes. We've done some work on mass evacuations. This particular project was on mass evacuation, and part of what we did was try to understand what role sort of volunteers and general public had. So we're looking. We created a whole suite of decision tools, but we started by having a sort of area. Having the population, the inhabitants of those cities mapped and look at the density. And then we created some models. So this is a model probably is more interesting for this talk. This is a model about warning dissemination. So it's basically you have different neighborhoods. You can see here the greenhouses are the ones that have been alerted that they need to evacuate. Red houses are people that are unevacuated. The red houses are the ones that don't have information. They don't know that they need to evacuate. The yellow houses, they know that they need to evacuate, but they haven't evacuated yet. So we use this model to study different modes of disseminating that warning message. We also looked at the actual evacuation, pedestrian traffic, so the road network and the traffic modeling, and shelter management as well within that, and the role of volunteers and some results, analysis of results. So I'll just present you with a quick example of some of the results and some of the experiments we carried out. So in this case, we were looking at the role of unofficial channels. So basically neighbors telling other neighbors that they need to evacuate. So we had the effectiveness of, for example, the blue line here, so no unofficial channels. So it's basically, this was in the middle of the night, so people getting their alerts through their phones or radio or TV. And then what happens if 25% of neighbors warn other people that they need to evacuate? What happens if 50% of neighbors warn other people that they need to evacuate? And we see of that volunteer organization, that involvement of the public has quite a big difference. So, I mean, that's basically some of the examples I wanted to touch on. And this has sort of risen some areas of interest that we think are worth looking at research, and we're very happy to talk to people if they want to collaborate. The first one is the coordination between governments, NGOs, and citizens. How do we do that, particularly with that sort of citizen volunteer element? So governments, NGOs, normally they will have some sort of already role within preparedness plans. And we think that maybe some use of technology, so artificial intelligence, or using infrastructure of smart cities, that could help to identify, for example, clusters where there's people needed, identify where people are volunteering, and try to match those two together. There are some ethical issues, I believe, to be considered in getting volunteers in a sort of coordinating them in an official role, because then you get into sort of, are you then liable if something happens to them? The effect of culture, I think, this is quite interesting. Different countries will have different levels of propensity for people to become involved in the society and help or not, so whether they're individualistic or collectivist organizations. In some cases, there have been sort of legislation which has been put into place. So I know here in the UK, the Cabinet Office Guidance for Preparedness. That's my 20 minutes. It will be just 20 seconds more. So they have put into place some guidance on how to use volunteers. In Mexico, they have also started legislating, saying that, for example, if you want to volunteer, you need to register first, so that they can have some sort of control. So that, again, that's an area of interest. And then finally, sort of probably using blockchains in terms of trusting the messages that are distributed, because there's a lot of misinformation, particularly nowadays, in terms of when it's a disaster and there's rumors that start going around. So I think I'll probably stop there. If you have any questions, here's my email, and I guess probably will be shared. And I'm happy to answer questions later when it's our turn.